The sun was burning over the vast desert where the human outpost stood. Wind carried grains of sand across the open ground, brushing against the tents and metal structures. Soldiers moved in silence, their eyes on the horizon. Something was coming, and it was not friendly. James stood near the communications tower, scanning the sky with narrowed eyes. He was a junior officer, but he had seen enough strange events in this sector to know trouble was close. The radar had shown unusual signals, but no one could identify them. He felt a mix of fear and curiosity in his chest. Without warning, the ground shook under a distant thunder. Dust rose like a giant wall as figures appeared in the shimmering heat. At first, they looked like humans in golden armor, but as they drew closer, their height, the glow in their eyes, and the smooth metal designs marked them as something else entirely. They were not soldiers from Earth. They were from the royal armies of the Valen Empire. The humans formed a defensive line. James gripped his rifle but noticed that the newcomers were not charging. Instead, a single figure broke away from the formation. She moved like the wind, her golden armor catching the sunlight in dazzling flashes. Her long silver-white hair streamed behind her, and her eyes were a piercing shade of blue. Even from a distance, James could tell she was unlike any warrior he had ever seen. When she reached speaking distance, she removed her helmet. Her beauty was so striking that for a moment, James forgot they were in a possible war zone. Her gaze met his, and for a second, it felt like the noise around them vanished. She spoke in a voice that was calm but carried the weight of command, telling him they were not here to fight. She had come with a message from her people. Her words were strange but clear. The Valen Empire sought an alliance, but only under one condition. James could see his commanding officer tense at the terms she laid out. They were not ordinary diplomatic demands. This was personal. The princess explained that in her culture, alliances were sealed not only with treaties, but with blood ties. A union had to be formed, and she had chosen someone from the human side. Her eyes never left James as she said it. James almost laughed from the shock. Without thinking, he smirked and replied, "Marry me then." He meant it as a joke to break the tension, to make the moment less strange. But to his surprise, her lips curved into a soft smile. Then she spoke words that made the air feel heavier. "I wish," she said gently. It was not just a reply. It was a confession, and James felt his heartbeat quicken. The human soldiers looked between them, confused and cautious. The alien guards behind the princess shifted their stances, watching every move. The heat, the silence, and the strange connection between James and the princess all mixed into something no one could explain. This was not just the start of a negotiation. This was the start of something that could change the future of both. Their peoples, the camp was restless after the strange exchange. Soldiers whispered to each other in small groups, trying to make sense of what had happened. James could feel their eyes on him every time he walked past. He had never been the center of such attention before, and he was not sure he liked it. The alien princess stood a short distance away, speaking quietly to her guards. Even without understanding their language, James could sense the respect they had for her. She was clearly a leader among her people, but there was also something personal in the way she looked at him earlier. He could still hear her voice saying those two words. His commanding officer called him into the strategy tent. Inside, the air was tense. The higher-ranking officers demanded an explanation. James tried to tell them exactly what happened, but they kept circling back to the same question. Why did she choose him? James had no answer. He barely understood it himself. Outside, the golden-armored Valen soldiers formed a neat perimeter. Their weapons looked advanced, yet they kept them lowered. It was a show of discipline, or perhaps a sign they truly came in peace. The humans mirrored the formation, but their tension was obvious. No one had ever seen aliens arrive this close. Without conflict before, The princess entered the tent without asking for permission. Her presence made the officers go silent. She removed her gloves and placed a small metallic disc on the table. It projected a hologram of two worlds, hers and Earth, connected by a bright golden bridge. She explained that their worlds could share knowledge, resources, and protection. But the bridge could only be built if the bond between their chosen representatives was sealed in the Valen way. James realized what she meant. The bond she spoke of was not symbolic, it was real. In her culture, such a bond could be a political marriage, an oath, or something even deeper. He tried to imagine himself in such a role, standing beside her not just as a soldier, but as an equal in front of her empire. The thought was overwhelming. The officers pushed for more details. They asked if there was another way to secure the alliance, but the princess shook her head. This was the only way to ensure trust between their peoples. Her words carried no arrogance. They were simple facts, spoken with the weight of centuries-old tradition. James noticed how the other officers avoided looking directly at her. It was not out of disrespect, but because her presence was disarming. She was calm, confident, and unshaken by the cold tone of military negotiations. When her eyes briefly met James's, he felt something shift inside him. This was not just duty anymore. This was personal. The meeting ended without an agreement, but the princess did not look disappointed. She walked out with the same poise she had entered with. Outside, the desert wind picked up, sending long trails of sand across the ground. James stepped out a moment later and found her standing alone, looking at the horizon. He approached her slowly, unsure what to say. She turned to him before he could speak. "You do not have to decide now," she said softly. "But know this: if you accept, you will not just be binding yourself to me. You will be binding our worlds together." Her words felt heavier than the heat in the air. James nodded, still not sure of his answer, but certain that his life had already changed. Asterisk. Night had fallen over the camp, but sleep was far away from the minds of both humans and Valens. The desert air had grown cooler, yet tension lingered like heat that refused to fade. Lanterns glowed dimly along the pathways between tents, casting long shadows over the sand. James walked slowly, trying to think about everything that had happened. Yet every thought led back to her. The alien princess had retired to her own quarters, an ornate, portable structure unlike anything the humans had seen. Its walls shimmered faintly, as if woven from strands of gold. Guards stood on each side, their spears humming with energy. James wondered if she was resting, or if she too was thinking about the strange bond they were being asked to form. Remembered her words in the tent, the way she said the bond was not just about two people. It was about uniting worlds. That weight was heavy on his shoulders, but there was also something else, something more personal, that he could not deny. She had looked at him not just as a soldier, but as someone she trusted with her future. James found himself walking toward her quarters without even realizing it. One of the guards stepped forward, blocking his path. The alien spoke in a language James could not understand, but the tone was clear. He was asking for a reason. James hesitated, then said he only wished to speak with the princess. The guard tilted his head, then stepped aside slowly. Inside, the air was warmer, scented with something floral and unfamiliar. The princess sat at a low table, a thin sheet of metal before her that shifted like liquid under her touch. She looked up as James entered, her expression calm yet curious. He realized he had no rehearsed words, only questions that had been building all day. "Why, Emmy?" he asked finally. It was the question he had been unable to answer for his own officers. She smiled faintly and said it was not random. Her people believed in signs, in the way fate revealed itself in small moments. When she first saw him at the edge of the human line, she felt something she could not ignore. James listened carefully. Her voice was steady, but there was warmth in it. She told him that among her people, Leaders were taught to see beyond the surface, to recognize not only strength, but also the potential to protect and understand. She saw that in him, even before he spoke to her. James was not sure if he deserved such trust, but her words struck deep. The conversation drifted to their worlds. She spoke of the Valen homeworld, tall crystal towers that reflected the light of two suns, oceans that glowed softly at night, and cities where no doors were locked because trust was a way of life. James told her about Earth, about its endless forests, its storms, its mountains, and the chaos of human cities. She listened as if every word mattered. A moment of silence passed between them, but it was not awkward. Outside, the night wind rustled the walls of the tent, making the golden fabric shimmer. The princess reached out, placing a small, delicate object on the table between them. It looked like a ring, but its surface shifted with colors like liquid light. She said it was a symbol of choice, not obligation. James stared at the object. His instincts told him to be cautious, but something else told him that refusing it would close a door that might never open again. He did not pick it up yet, but he did not push it away either. The princess seemed to understand. She smiled, and for a brief moment, the weight of politics and war disappeared, leaving only two people in the quiet of the desert night. The next morning, the camp awoke to an unfamiliar sound. It was a low hum, like machinery deep underground. Human soldiers stepped out of their tents, looking toward the horizon. The golden armored Valens were already alert, their weapons in hand but not raised. Something was approaching from the far dunes. James was among the first to see it clearly. A dark shape emerged from the haze, moving fast. At first, it looked like a sandstorm, but as it came closer, metallic glints appeared in the swirling dust. These were not natural winds. They were machines shaped like predators from another world, moving with a deadly grace. The alien princess stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She said a single word in her language, and her guards tightened their formation. James did not understand the word, but the tone was enough to know this was trouble. His instincts told him these machines were not here for peace. The human commander gave the order to prepare defenses. Soldiers ran to man the mounted guns while others moved supplies and secured equipment. James stayed close to the princess, not out of duty alone, but because something told him she might be the key to understanding the threat. They faced. The first of the machines reached the edge of the camp. Its design was unlike anything James had seen before: sleek black metal, sharp edges, and legs that moved like liquid steel. It stopped just short of the defensive line, its single red sensor eye glowing as it scanned the camp. Then it spoke in a voice that was cold and inhuman, demanding the surrender of the Valen princess. No one moved. The humans kept their weapons aimed, and the Valens raised their shields. The princess stepped forward, ignoring the tension around her. She told the machine it had no authority here, and that her presence was under the protection of both her people and the humans. The machine's red eye pulsed, as if considering her words. Then, without warning, more of the machines broke through the haze, circling the camp. The humans and Valens formed a joint perimeter, side by side. James found himself shoulder to shoulder with one of the princess's guards, their weapons pointed outward. For the first time, the two forces moved as one, without hesitation or mistrust. The princess moved closer to James, in a low voice. She told him these machines were not from her empire. They were from a rival faction that saw her alliance with humans as a threat. If they succeeded in taking her, both their peoples would lose any chance of unity. Her words burned into James's mind like a command he could not refuse. The machines advanced a step, their legs sinking into the sand with sharp, metallic clicks. The human commander gave one last warning for them to retreat. The machine leader responded with silence, then raised a weapon mounted on its arm. That was all it took. Both human and Valen lines opened fire in a thunder of energy bolts and bullets. The desert erupted in chaos. Sand exploded into the air as gunfire tore through the first wave of machines. Some fell, their glowing eyes dimming, but others pushed forward, undeterred. James fought hard, covering the princess as she moved between positions, giving quick orders to her guards. She was not a ruler hiding behind walls. She was a fighter, and her courage pulled others to fight harder. By the time the last machine fell, the sun was high, and the air was thick with the smell of scorched metal. The ground was littered with broken pieces of black armor, still warm from the battle. Human and Valen soldiers stood together, breathing heavily but victorious. The princess looked at James, her expression calm but her eyes shining with something he could not name. The battlefield was silent except for the sound of the wind pushing loose sand across the broken metal. Human and Valen soldiers worked together to move the damaged machines away from the camp. The princess stood in the center, speaking softly to her guards while keeping her eyes on the horizon. She seemed to be thinking about something far beyond the fight they had just won. James approached her, brushing dust from his uniform. She turned to him with a calm expression, as if she had expected him to come. He asked if she was hurt, but she shook her head. Her armor was scratched, but she looked untouched by fear or fatigue. She said the battle was only the first move in something larger. The human commander called a meeting inside the strategy tent. Maps and holographic displays covered the table, showing areas far beyond the desert. Intelligence reports suggested that the rival faction behind the machines was growing stronger, and that this attack was likely only a test. If that was true, both humans and Valens would need to prepare for more. The princess spoke with authority, explaining that her people had faced these enemies before. They were relentless, and their goal was not just to defeat armies, but to break alliances before they could form. She warned that her presence on Earth might draw more attacks, but she also made it clear that leaving would mean giving the enemy exactly what they wanted. James listened closely. He could feel the tension in the tent as the human officers weighed the risk of keeping her there. The princess's voice was steady, but when her gaze met his, there was something unspoken, an understanding that whatever decision was made, they would face it together. After the meeting, James walked with her through the camp. The soldiers they passed saluted her respectfully, something they had not done the day before. She had earned it in battle, not through her title. The humans were beginning to see her not as a stranger, but as an ally worth standing beside. They stopped near the edge of the camp where the desert stretched endlessly under the afternoon sun. The princess told James that among her people, fighting together in battle created a bond stronger than any written oath. She said their actions yesterday had already begun the bond she spoke of in the tent before. James found himself without an answer, his thoughts caught between duty and something deeper. That night, the camp was quieter than usual. Repairs were being made, and scouts were sent to watch the horizon. James sat outside his tent, staring at the ring-like object the princess had given him. Its surface shifted like liquid light, reflecting shapes and colors he could not name. He wondered what would happen if he accepted it fully. The princess approached silently, her steps barely making a sound on the sand. She sat beside him, her presence warm even in the cool desert air. She did not speak at first. Instead, she watched the stars, her eyes reflecting their glow. Finally, she said that in her culture, such a gift was never taken back. It was a promise, even if the other person had not yet chosen to wear it. James turned the object in his hand. He thought about the danger, the politics, and the uncertainty ahead. But he also thought about her courage, her calm, and the way she had stood beside him when the machines attacked. Slowly, he closed his hand around it. The princess smiled faintly, and in that moment, the future felt both uncertain and unshakably real. Asterisk morning light spilled across the desert, painting the sand in shades of gold. The camp was already awake, soldiers moved in with quiet urgency as they repaired weapons and reinforced defenses. The memory of the machine attack still hung heavy in the air, but there was also a sense of unity that had not been there before. James emerged from his tent, the strange ring-like object now resting securely in a pouch on his belt. He felt its weight with every step, as if it carried more than just metal and light. The princess was speaking with the human commander, her voice calm but firm. Even without hearing the words, James knew she was planning for what came next. The commander called James over, telling him that the Valen leader had requested his presence in the next diplomatic meeting. It was not common for a soldier of his rank to be included in such talks, but James understood why. The princess had chosen him, and that choice had made him part of something far larger than the war in the desert. Inside the meeting tent, maps of both Earth and the Valen homeworld were spread across the table. The princess explained that the enemy faction was preparing a strike not only here but in orbit as well. If they succeeded, they could cut off supplies and reinforcements, leaving both worlds vulnerable. Her plan was bold: strike first. Before the enemy could gather their full force, some human officers hesitated, pointing out the risk of moving troops into unfamiliar territory. The princess countered by offering Valen ships and intelligence, making it clear that her people would fight alongside humans as equals. Her eyes never left James as she spoke, as if silently asking if he was ready to stand with her when the time came. James gave a single nod. He did not need to speak for her to understand his answer. The princess turned back to the table, her tone sharp and decisive as she outlined the first stages of the joint operation. There was no room for uncertainty. The enemy was already moving, and hesitation would cost lives. Later that day, James walked with the princess to the landing site where her ship waited. It was unlike any human craft, sleek, curved, and glowing faintly as if alive. Her guards stood at attention, their armor shining in the sun. She told him that once they left the ground, there would be no turning back. The mission would either unite their worlds forever or tear them apart. James stepped inside the ship, feeling the hum of its systems through the floor. The interior was filled with soft light, walls that seemed to shift with movement, and a faint scent of something like rain. The princess led him to the command chamber, where a large viewing screen displayed the stars and the distant curve of the planet. It was the first time James truly saw how small Earth looked from above. The ship rose smoothly into the sky, leaving the desert behind. Below them, the camp grew smaller until it was no more than a dot against the endless sand. The princess stood beside him, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the console. She said that no matter what happened, their choice to stand together would shape the course of history for both their peoples. James felt the truth of her words. He could see it in the way she carried herself, in the way she looked at him without fear. He reached for the pouch at his belt, pulling out the ring-like object. For a moment he simply held it, the shifting colors reflecting in his eyes. Then, without hesitation, he slid it onto his finger. The princess's eyes softened, and her voice, when she finally spoke, was filled with something beyond politics or duty. It was hope. The Valen ship moved through space with silent precision, its smooth hull reflecting the faint glow of nearby stars. James stood near the viewing glass, watching as distant lights passed in slow arcs. The princess stood beside him, her eyes focused not on the beauty of space, but on the path ahead. This was no ordinary mission. It was a strike meant to change the course of a growing war. The ship's crew moved quickly but without panic. Each alien officer seemed to know their place and purpose. James could feel the weight of their discipline. The princess had explained earlier that her people trained for unity before they ever trained for combat. That was why they could fight as one without hesitation. A tactical display lit up in the command chamber. showing a cluster of dark shapes moving across the edge of Valen-controlled space. The enemy faction had deployed more ships than expected, their positions forming a loose perimeter. The princess studied the pattern in silence before giving a series of crisp commands to her crew. James noticed that she never raised her voice, yet every order was followed instantly. James leaned closer to the display. Human military training told him the formation was too open to be defensive. This was a trap. He pointed it out quietly, and the princess glanced at him with an approving look. She ordered the ship to change its approach vector, avoiding the direct path the enemy wanted them to take. Moments later, the ship's sensors detected an energy spike, proof that the enemy had been waiting to spring an ambush. The crew adjusted course again, moving along a narrow band of space where asteroid shadows could shield them from detection. James felt a surge of respect for their skill. These were not warriors relying on luck. They were thinking ahead at every turn. The princess turned to James, explaining that this mission was not simply about defeating ships. They were targeting a central command hub hidden deep within an asteroid field. If they could disable it, the enemy's fleet would lose coordination, giving both humans and Valens the advantage. James understood that this was as much about precision as it was about courage. As they drew closer to the asteroid field, the lighting in the ship shifted to a dim red glow. The princess explained that this reduced the chance of being detected by enemy scans. James could hear the faint hum of the ship's energy weapons charging. The tension in the air was sharp, but no one spoke of fear. Every movement was focused and deliberate. The first enemy patrol appeared on their flank. 3 small fighter craft darted toward them, weapons hot. The princess gave the order, and the Valen gunners responded with swift bursts of energy fire. 2 fighters exploded in flashes of light, while the third tried to retreat. James watched as a well-aimed shot from the ship's lower batteries ended the chase. They pressed on, weaving between massive rocks that drifted in slow silence. The asteroid field was dense, forcing the pilot to move with almost surgical precision. James stood close to the console, ready to react if anything broke through. The princess remained at the center of the command chamber, her calm presence anchoring the crew's focus. Finally, the target came into view, a massive station built into the side of a jagged asteroid, its metal surface glowing faintly with shield energy. The princess ordered all systems to prepare for a concentrated strike. James could feel the power building in the ship's main weapon. This was the moment their entire mission had been moving toward, and the success or failure of everything rested on what happened next. The enemy command hub loomed larger in the viewing screen, its jagged shape half hidden by the asteroid's shadow. Lines of red energy pulsed across its surface like veins, feeding power to its weapons and shields. James could feel the tension in the air as the crew prepared for the final strike. The princess stood at the center of the command chamber, her posture steady and unshaken. She gave the order, and the Valen ship's main weapon charged with a low, rising hum. Lights across the control panels glowed brighter as power was diverted to the forward batteries. James kept his eyes on the targeting display, watching as the crosshairs locked onto the hub shield generator. The moment the alignment turned green, the princess's voice rang out with the command to fire. A beam of golden energy tore through the darkness, striking the hub's shields with crushing force. The asteroid shook under the impact, fragments breaking away into the void. Enemy fighters swarmed out of hidden ports, but the Valen gunners were ready. Blasts of blue-white fire cut through the attackers, clearing a path for another shot at the shield generator. The second volley hit harder. The shield flared, then shattered into sparks that faded into the black of space. Without its protection, the hub's outer walls were vulnerable. The princess ordered precision fire, targeting key structural points rather than simply destroying the station outright. She wanted to cripple its ability to command, not cause a reckless explosion that might harm nearby civilian outposts. James moved to assist one of the tactical officers, relaying human combat data that showed weak points in the station's communication relays. Working together, they directed the gunners to fire in short surgical bursts. Piece by piece, the enemy hub's systems went dark. Its weapon ports fell silent, its engines shut down, and its command signals stopped reaching the fleet. The remaining enemy ships scattered. Without coordination, they were no match for the combined firepower of the Valen fleet and the small contingent of human support ships that had joined them in orbit. The battle shifted from chaos to cleanup, and within minutes, the area around the asteroid was clear of threats. A quiet relief settled over the bridge. The princess turned to James, her expression softer now. She told him that the victory they had achieved together would be remembered for generations. Not because of the size of the battle, but because it had proven what unity between their peoples could accomplish. Her words carried more weight than any medal or honor James could imagine. As the ship turned away from the ruined hub, James felt the strange ring-like object on his finger shift its colors again. This time, the light settled into a warm, steady glow. The princess noticed and smiled, explaining that it now recognized their bond as complete. It was no longer a question of if they would stand together, but how far they would go side by side. When they returned to Earth, the camp greeted them as heroes. Human and Valen soldiers stood in the same lines, their differences set aside. The human commander formally thanked the princess for her leadership, and she returned the gesture, praising the bravery of the human soldiers. James stayed slightly back, but the princess soon called him forward to stand beside her. In front of both armies, she took his hand. Her voice was clear as she declared him not only her chosen ally but her chosen partner in the bond that would unite their worlds. The moment was met with cheers from both sides. James looked at her, realizing that the joke he had made in the desert was now a living truth. She had smiled then and said, "I wish." Now standing here, she smiled again, and this time she said, "We did." Asterisk.